there, welcome to the channel, or welcome back. I'm Angela, and this is where I talk with you guys about all things related to my love of fabric and sewing. And in today's video, I'm going to do a sew along for the Love Notions Tessa sheath dress. And depending on how fast we work, this will either be the full make or maybe part one of a two-part series for the sew along. If that sounds interesting, stick around. Just a couple of notes before we jump into this. I have already cut my pieces out. I did that a little while back, and then life got busy and I traveled a little bit, so I'm just now getting back to this. And then the other things regarding sizing, I cut an XL at the shoulders and bust, grading out to the 2X at the waist and hips. I added 1 inch length at the waist and 2 inches length at the knee. And I am doing the sleeveless version, but I'm doing a solid front. I'm not doing that little yoke or piece at the top there. So it's the sleeveless version with the boat neck or the bateau neck. So I'm not doing the scoop neck, just so you guys know that up front. And I think that that's all the kind of notes I wanted to share with you before we get going. And if you are ready, let's start sewing. And here's a quick peek at the pieces of the pattern. And since I am doing the sleeveless version, of course, I don't need the sleeves. And I'm doing the bateau neck binding. And I've got my arm side binding. So really all I've got is the front, the back, the neck binding, and the arm side binding. So pretty simple, not too many pieces to cut out. And the front was cut on the fold. The back was cut in 2 separate pieces. And that is because it looks like there's a little bit of shaping for the back, which will be nice. You can do this pattern out of a woven, and in that case it gives you facing options, but if you're doing the knit, then they give you the binding options. So the first step will be to stitch the back pieces together at center back using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to pull those out. And since I did make some changes or alterations, adjustments to the pattern, I did end up tracing the pattern. So I've got these on the tissue paper that I used to do the tracing. I've got my back pieces there. And for now, I'll just move the front off to the side. And the fabric that I'm using is a really pretty knit from Emma One Sock, sort of this darker blue-green with really pretty ribbing on it. See that? So I am going to turn these right sides together and stitch them up at center back. Okay, so we've got that pinned up. I'm going to take you over to the sewing machine and get that seam stitched up. I don't have a serger, at least not yet, but one is coming very soon. So I'm just going to use a small zigzag stitch for most of the seams in this garment. So let's head over to the sewing machine. So here we are over at the sewing machine, and just a little word before we start. I have kind of made myself get into the habit of just checking that I have right sides together or wrong sides, as the case may be, before I start stitching. That's one of those lessons that I think maybe a lot of us have learned the hard way. All right, let's open it up and take a look. Back on. So this is what our seam looks like. I'm a little concerned about pressing this. I don't want to flatten these nice ribs. What I might do, take a closer look at it back over on the sewing table and see if it even needs pressing. So usually I am a pretty big stickler for pressing as I go. I'm a little concerned about smashing these pretty ribs on this rib knit, and I'm kind of wondering if it needs a pressing. I'm going to take us back over to the cutting table. We'll take a closer look and see before we move on to the next step. Okay, so we've got it over here and kind of look at it the right side or the facing side, and I think it is going to need pressing for sure. I was kind of hoping that I might not have to, but I definitely am going to have to. Yeah, definitely. So what I'm going to do, and I'm not sure about finishing the raw edges off. I might leave that for now and do that later, but definitely pressing for now. So let me get my ironing mat set up and get my iron plugged in. I'll be right back. So while the iron was heating up, I had to go back and check what the fiber content of this fabric is. And it is 100% cotton, so I know which setting to choose on my iron. And I'm just going to give it a gentle pressing, pressing the seams open. Take a look at it. Yeah, that looks nice. I'm just going to continue on with that. And I have to admit that I am not the world's best at pressing. I tend to go full bore with it when maybe a little bit more finesse would be called for. So I'm trying to improve my ways. And thinking about it as far as finishing the edges of these seams, it may not be needed, but I think I definitely don't want to do that until I try it on, until I get it mostly together and try it on, in case I need to take it in some. I tried to err on the side of making it a little bit more generous as far as the cut than the other way around. You can always take fabric off, but you can't put it back on. Oh yeah, now that I'm pressing this out, I can't believe that I would even think of continuing on without pressing it. Yeah, that makes all the difference in the world. So let's turn it over and see what we're looking at there. Make sure that looks good. I might just do a gentle little steam on the front side there. Okay, yeah, definitely give it a press, even with a thicker, heavier knit like this. So the next step will be to stitch one of the shoulder seams together. It doesn't specify which, so just one. So I'm going to grab my front here and making sure to right sides together. All right, get those pinned up. So I just chose one of the shoulder seams, got it pinned up. I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and stitch, and I'll be right back. This will be a quick little seam, so I'm going to leave you here and I'll be right back. All right, got that shoulder seam stitched together there, and it does specify to press the seam allowance open. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, now, and next I'm going to grab my neck binding. And this gets stitched to the neckline, right sides together. So I'm going to get that all pinned up, get myself situated in a better orientation here. Okay, so I've got my neckline kind of laid out there, and I've got my neck binding. I'm going to pin this right sides together to the neckline, and I'm guessing that the neck binding is going to be at least a little significantly shorter in length than the neckline. So just out of curiosity, okay, there were no notches cut out. So what I'm going to do is to just pin the ends together and then kind of stretch it evenly. Let's take a look at that. Make sure I got my right sides together. So that's what we're looking like as far as difference there. That's pretty significant difference. It's going to get a lot of stretch. Oftentimes, because I'm relatively new to sewing with knits, this can be like a tricky part for me, just getting it evenly stretched out when I'm doing any kind of like armhole or neck bindings. And if there's notches, or you can match up center back, center front notches, that does kind of help. But I think that with this one, it did not have any notches for this seam unless I totally just missed them. Either way, I think it's going to work out okay. After I pin, I'm stretching it just to see what I still have to work with. I may not be the best one to be demonstrating this technique, but the best way to learn something, I think, is just to jump in and do it. All right, I've got that all pinned up. And let's head over to the sewing machine now to get this seam sewn up. Okay, here we are over at the sewing machine. And let me find my neckline. And once again, last chance to check that right sides are together. And it looks like we are good. This fabric is pretty heavy, so I'm trying to make sure that it's not hanging way off the table down here and stretching it unnecessarily. Kind of gathering it up in my lap. Okay, let's head back over to the cutting table and see what our next step is. All right, first of all, let's see how this binding looks. And I'm kind of wondering if I maybe should have chosen a thinner binding fabric. We'll see. It might end up being a little bulky around the neckline and the arm side, but we will see. So just want to take a look at this and see. Okay, so the next step is to press the binding along with the seam allowances up away from the body of the garment. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, that's pressing pretty nicely there. I got this fabric as a remnant, so it was a pretty good deal, but I still, don't want to mess it up, even if, it wasn't the most expensive piece of fabric. It is beautiful, and I want this dress to turn out nicely, so I'm trying to be very mindful of my pressing habits. Whoops, almost lost it there. So we've got it pressed up, and then the next thing is to turn under the binding to the wrong side at the seam line there. And I have to say this is pretty bulky here because it's a heavier weight sweater knit. We are working with a lot of bulk, so that may need to be addressed. We might have to address that. We'll take a look. And I'm going to go ahead, pardon my reach here, and grab my tailor's ham. I think that might make this go a little bit, might make it easier to maneuver this while I press. Yeah, definitely. Good call. Okay. And the next thing that we're going to want to do is to fold under the raw edge of the neck binding, encasing the seam allowance there. And this is where I think it's going to be maybe a little tricky because there's already so much bulk, and folding that under adds on a couple extra layers of thickness. So I'm going to do the best I can here, and we'll see what we're working with. And I'm also wondering, because this neck binding is now so thick right there, if it's going to affect the way that the neckline lays. We'll find out. Or if I should trim out some of this seam allowance. Yeah, that is a lot of bulk there. I'm almost thinking I need to address this now before I stitch. We'll see. Because I feel like that picking stitches out on this rib knit is not going to be fun should I have to. I'm also running into another issue here. I did not finish off the raw edges on the shoulder seam, and it may not be necessary. Once I do this binding though, it'll be harder to get in there with the machine, but it can be done, just won't be as clean. I am really looking forward to the arrival of my serger. Will be long awaited. This dress is probably not going to see a whole lot of wear just because I don't wear dresses frequently, and because it is a little bit on the dressier side as opposed to, say, just just a simple jersey knit sundress or something. It probably just won't see a lot of wear, therefore not a lot of laundering, and I can hand wash it just to pay special attention to those raw edges. But I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish those off. It's they're already a little fuzzy just from handling, so I don't feel comfortable leaving those raw, not like I would, say, with a jersey knit. So I will end up addressing that, and I could even do that by hand so I don't have to try to finagle this under the machine. I'm just kind of itching to make progress on this, so I'm going to keep moving forward for now. I'm already kind of envisioning another issue here. When it comes time to sew this other shoulder seam, this bulky binding area could present some issues. We'll see. All right. I'm going to get you back over to the sewing machine and we're going to get this binding stitched down. Okay, here we are back over at the sewing machine, and I'm kind of wondering for this neck binding if I should do a straight stitch rather than a small zigzag. And I have a little scrap here that I'm going to do the zigzag on and just kind of see how it affects the appearance on the right side. Okay. I think the zigzag will be okay, and that will allow for some give too, should it be needed. Okay, here we go. Fingers crossed. So it seems to be sewing up pretty nicely. I haven't encountered any issues from all these layers in the bulk. Yeah, this might work. We'll you know, So testing the zigzag out on this was a little different than doing a zigzag on the binding, because this is a seam that you will open up and the zigzag's hidden. But now that I'm seeing it here on the neck, I'm wondering if I should have done a straight stitch. And now I'm wondering, even though I've only sewn maybe 3 or so inches, do I really want to bother picking that out or just let it go with the zigzag? I don't know if that's showing up for you guys, because it's kind of a noticeable stitch. Or am I just okay with just go for it, let it ride? Let's just let it ride. We'll see how it turns out. Let's look at it again. I mean, it's definitely noticeable, but I don't know if it's enough so that it bothers me, so I'm just going for it. Once again, this is how we learn. At least that's the kind of mentality or attitude that I kind of go into these projects with. Unless, of course, it's something so precious that I don't want to take any chances, and I will practice and practice and practice the heck out of it before moving on. like I did with my wedding dress. That's something that I enjoyed the process of, but it was a little bit nervous making. Glad I did it. Glad it's done. That was many, many years ago. Turned out great. And as always, I always welcome the input from you guys because you guys are so knowledgeable. And I love the fact that we can all learn from each other. It's the wonderful thing about the internet. Hey, let's take it back over to the cutting table, give it a good press, and see what we have. Okay, so here's what we've got after sewing the neck binding down. And get you in a little closer there. It doesn't look horrible. You can definitely, at least I can here in person, see that it seems like it looks bulky from the outside, and I don't know if that's because it's a little puffy. I think it's okay though. It's not enough to bother me or anything. I am going to go ahead and give it a good press though. My iron kind of went to sleep, so we'll let that wake back up. And I looked a little further ahead at the instructions, and I am definitely one that is guilty of not reading and or following instructions. And it did say to use a straight stitch to stitch the binding down. So that probably means that having used the zigzag, the stitching is a little bit more prominent than it would have been or should have been. I'm just going to let it ride. It's not the big deal to me. So I'm not, especially picky about such things. So got that pressed down. And the next thing that we're going to do is to stitch the other shoulder seam together. So let me get this kind of straightened out here. So I'm just going to pin together this other shoulder seam, get it stitched up, and I will be right back. Okay, got that shoulder seam stitched together, so I'm going to press it open. And if you remember back when I was talking about having done the neck binding this way, that I might end up with a lot of bulk here at the inner shoulder seam, that did happen actually. So I think what I'm going to do when all is said and done is just maybe hand stitch that down to the inside of the binding here, just so it's not, if that's showing up. It is it's bulky. So maybe I could get that trimmed down and then stitch the remaining part down so that it's just not going to stand up. And I think that had they had you go ahead and stitch both shoulder seams together and then put the neck binding on, that wouldn't have resulted in that. But it was kind of interesting to do a neckline that way, where you leave one shoulder open, put the binding on, and then close it up. It's not the way that I typically do necklines and shoulder seams, but it was kind of something good to try. So I'm going to press this open here. I'm definitely going to have a little bit of hand work to do on this when it's finished, which I don't mind. I kind of enjoy a little bit of hand sewing now and then, just for small things, or putting zippers in, sometimes invisible zippers. I like to hand stitch those in. All right, I got that pressed down. So I'm finding the instructions on this pattern to be not the easiest to follow as far as the steps. It kind of jumps around based on whether you're doing sleeves or sleeveless, the yoke, facings versus neck bindings. So I'm kind of having to pick my way around in the instructions to find the next step. Now, the actual details of how to do each step are very good and clear, I think. So I think that the next thing we're going to do is to stitch the side seams together. And because I'm kind of having to jump back around from back and forth on the instructions, I can't tell if they are having you to do the arm side binding the same way as the neck, like doing it before you close up that seam. If they are, I'm going to not do it that way. I'm going to go ahead and just do the side seams and then put the arm side binding on. So our next thing that we're going to do is to do the side seams. Just kind of getting this laid out here so that I can get it pinned up together. I did do the full bust option on this, so I'm kind of wondering how that's going to impact stitching these together. There'll probably need to be a little bit of stitching or stretching along the back piece here, looking for my notches and get those lined up. Oftentimes with side seams, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to notches when I can get away with it, but I think because of doing the full bust option, it's kind of going to be important to make sure that everything matches up the way it should. So I'm kind of thinking there might need to be just a little bit of stretching to accommodate the full bust section on the front. So a little bit of stretching on the back to match that up, if that made sense. I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about when I get to that point. I'm going to save that part for last. Okay, so that may or may not be the case. I'm holding it up here. It looks like it's matching up pretty evenly. Just get it pinned together and see how it turns out. I think it's going to be okay. No stretching needed. And maybe they accommodated for that in the pattern. I can't remember. I cut this out so long ago, and I'm just now getting back to it. Okay, I am going to go ahead and get this stitched up, and I'm going to leave you guys here for now, and I'll be right back. All right, got that side stitched up. I'm going to pin and stitch the other side, and then I'm going to be at a point where I'm going to go ahead and try it on before putting the arm bindings in. So far, this is coming together really easily, and it is just a simple, as the name says, sheath dress. Nothing fancy about it. If you were going to do the yoke or add sleeves, of course, that would add, complexity to it and, require more time. But just doing the sleeveless and the no yoke, just the plain front, this is coming together really quickly. And of course, I ended up with a little extra there. Maybe I cut it wrong. I matched the notches and one side's longer than the other. Don't you hate when that happens? I'm going to see how it ends up when I pin up towards the top, towards the underarm section. I probably just cut it inaccurately. It's okay. I did add 2 inches onto the length because I wanted it to be, I wanted to make sure that it didn't fall or hit above my knee, or even, mid-knee or below, I guess you might say. So it could be that I just made an error there. So that allows me some flexibility if I need to shorten it just by a ½ inch. It won't be, a big deal. So we're matching up pretty good here at the top. So I'm just going to chalk that up to a cutting error along the hemline. Leave it at that. It will not be a problem. I'll be right back. All right. Got both of the side seams stitched up now. And I'm going to go try this on and I will be back. I'll either show you or let you know how it fits depending on how it is. And either way, I'll be back and we'll move on from here. I'm stretching here in the bedroom where I have my full-length mirror, and we're going to kind of see how this fits together, if any adjustments need to be made. I think it's positioned pretty good for you to be able to see. Yeah, I think it fits pretty good overall. I hope I'm still in frame there for you guys to see. And it's comfortable. It feels fitted through here, but not tight, which is nice. I like the adjustments and the grading that I did, so that's nice. And the little bit of fitting along the center back seam, pretty good too. I'm glad that it is cut that way and wasn't cut on the fold. I do have a little bit of a sway back, so kind of took care of that. I feel like I'm having a hard time getting in the mirror where you guys can see. So the one thing that I'm kind of noticing is right under here, the little bit gaping. So I'm going to take a look at that, and I think it might just be a matter of kind of pinning that down. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I did as far as pinning the underarm here. And then once I measure how much I'm going to take it in there, I'm also going to make that notation on the pattern piece that I had traced in case I want to make this again. I won't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So let us see what we're looking at here. So it's quite a bit. Let me lower you back down. Okay. Put my handy dandy wrist pin cushion on. Do you guys use one of these? I like it when I can actually remember to wear this thing when I sew because I love using it. I don't often think about it. So grab my tape measure too. So I made a pin. I put a pin in where I'm going to take it into. And if I measure that to the seam, it is 1 1/4 inches. So that's quite a bit. I'm going to do the same thing on each side. And what that means is that I'm going to taper it down to the waist. So I'm going to lay the garment out flat. And I'm going to get out my white chalk pencil and just draw a new stitching line from where I marked the underarm take-in point down to the waist and blend it in. I might actually get out my French curve to do that. And then I'll do the same thing over here on the other side. Just restitch that and go from there. So let me go grab my white chalk pen and my French curve, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I grabbed my French curve there. This is my white chalk pen that I use for marking on a lot of fabrics. As long as the fabric's not white or off-white, it works. It's really good. The brand it's Bohin or Bohen, however you would say that in French. I apologize for butchering that. It's just like a mechanical pencil where you push down and the chalk kind of drops further and further down, has an eraser on the top. Love it. If I can find this on Amazon, I will link it below. And then I just grabbed a regular pen as well to mark my pattern piece. So I'm going to grab the pattern piece now because I don't want to forget to mark this. This dress is fitting so nicely that I could definitely see wanting to make it again. So I'm going to measure this once more just to make sure that I got it right. I'm going to measure it from the, not from the seam though, but from the outer edge of the fabric. And we are looking at, to get a little bit closer there. I don't want to stick my big head in the camera and block your guys' view, but it may come down to that. So we're looking at 1.5 inches. All right, so I am going to mark that on this pattern piece. And it'll have to be done for both the front and the back. Grab my ruler here. I know if I don't do this right now, I will probably forget and it may never get done. Then I'll have to go through this every time I make this dress. All right, so that should be enough to know how much to take off when I make it again. I also made a note on there to do the same thing on the back piece. But for now, what I'm going to do, so the tricky thing is that this was the full bust option. So I'm wondering if I take this in, if I'm not careful about how I draw this curve, if it will impact the full bustness of it, so to speak. I'm going to just kind of put my ruler here and play around with it a little bit and see what I get. Normally, I would draw the curve going kind of inward into the garment, but because this had the full bust, I'm wondering if I need to handle this a little bit differently. In fact, I'm pretty sure I am going to need to do that. So I'm going to use the outer edge of the curve and kind of bow it out. And I can always baste it, try it on again, and see where we stand. So that's an option. Yeah, I think that's the better option. I don't want to lose any volume in the bust area. I just need to close up that underarm gap and then make it blend in smoothly. That is the goal here. So I've got my line drawn on there. Can you guys see that chalk line there? I think that this is the right approach. And then what I'm going to do is to go ahead and slide this over and do the exact same thing on the other side here. So I'll measure in 1.5 inches from the cut edge, from the raw edge. And got a good solid mark there with the chalk. And I did make sure to note when I was drawing my curve on this side to note that I started with the 7 here to make sure I line the 7 up with the top of the underarm raw edge here so that the curve will be the same. I hope that made sense. All right, I've got a pretty visible line here. I think I'm going to kind of bring them in closer together just to make sure that they look pretty matching, that one's not glaringly off from the other, and they look pretty good. So now I'm going to get this pinned up, and I think that I am going to put a basting stitch in here just in case. We'll go from there. Get that side pinned up really good. This side pinned up pretty good. Okay, I'm going to run this over to the machine, get that basting stitch in, and then I'm going to try it on again and see how it fits then. Be right back. All right, got those stitches in. Take my pins out. And I could have just pinned this up really well and not done the stitching at all and tried it on that way. It's my preference not to do that though, because I often poke myself with pins or have pins falling out and then I lose track of them and so forth. So I'd rather just run a quick basting stitch in, retry it on, and go from there. So I will be right back. All right, I have tried it on. I love the fit. I'm going to go ahead and put the permanent stitching into the side seams. But while I was trying it on, the sway back, the loose back there was kind of bugging me. So I thought, why not just go ahead and adjust for that too? So I did pin it up along the back, center back seam to make those adjustments. And I'm going to go ahead and lay this out, get my curve ruler, draw the new stitching line, and put a basting stitch in there. So actually I might do that first, then retry it on. So I didn't envision all of this fiddling and adjustments. So I apologize to you guys who are just here to see how to sew this dress up. Hopefully you might find this a little helpful too, or you can just fast forward through this part. Let me bring you back down here. And let us, so this is my center back seam here. It was a little difficult putting these pins in just by myself. So they're a little off. I can see that now. And I'm going to just do the best that I can with making this adjustment. What I may do is to draw the curve, put the pins in along that curve, then try it on before even doing a basting stitch. But first, let me just, yeah, it was really kind of tricky to get this pinned up for myself. And I want this to be a gentle, smooth seam. So that is kind of what I see running into with this, trying to so that it's not like a pronounced start and stop where that adjustment was made. I'm still fairly new at like trying to get good at making these types of adjustments for myself. So it's all a learning process, and that's, you know, part of what makes it fun. And it looks pretty. I don't want this to be so exaggerated, so I might be a little conservative about this at first and just more of not go in too deep into the garment yet. Start with small. Can always just keep taking, you know, bite-sized pieces into the garment, if you will, as it were, if you will. Okay. Let's see how we're looking there. Yeah. So I drew my line there. Hope that's showing up for you guys. And the pins were all even deeper into the garment than this line, but I'm going to just start with this line. I'm going to baste it, there and then see, see how it looks. I was almost kind of afraid of cinching it in too tight. There needs to be some ease and some movement, flexibility there. It can't be too tight onto my back. So there is that. So let me take this over to the machine and get it basted. Then I'm going to try it on and I'll be back. All right, I'm pretty happy with these adjustments. I'm going to go ahead and put the stitching in, trim it up, and try it on one last time, see where things stand, and we'll go from there. This might be a good stopping point for this so that this video is not like an hour long and break it into two parts, but we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and do this. One more try on. Okay, I've got all the final stitching in for those adjustments and what I need to do next. And I have to say at this point, I've kind of abandoned the pattern because it's kind of all self-explanatory from this point as far as the steps. Not suggesting that any of you guys abandon the pattern at any time, but because I was having an issue with it kind of jumping back and forth a little bit based on which of the options you'd chosen, and there's so little left to do on this, I feel like at this point I don't really need to look at the pattern because the only thing left are the armhole bindings and the hem. And I'm going to walk you through how I'm doing that, especially because I did make adjustments to the armholes. So I'm going to grab my armhole bindings and point you back down here to the table, and we'll go from there. Okay, so the armhole bindings are here. And I know there's two of them, one for each armhole, of course. And I know that I'm going to have to shorten these a little bit because I took off pretty decent amount from under the underarm here. And what I'm going to do, there are a couple of ways that you can do this. Some people will use a measurement that the binding should be roughly 85%, 80 to 90% of the length of the neckline or the armhole line, whichever one you're working on. I think though what I am probably going to do is to just pin it down to the underarm seam, leaving a seam allowance, and stretch it around till it meets back up under the arm. And this works because I know about how much stretch I'm looking for. If you're not sure about that, then I would suggest that you use a rough guideline of 85 to 90%. That can vary based on the type and like heaviness, thickness of the fabric that you're using. And if you want to make absolute sure, I'm going to just push you off onto Google because I don't want to tell you a number and then it doesn't work for whichever fabric that you're using. So yeah, I hope that made sense, and I'm not trying to be evasive about it. It just really all depends on which fabric that you're using. Or you could just do it the logical way and measure however much you took off for the armhole seam, take that much off on this. I'm just kind of curious. Maybe I will do it that way and not cut it off, but pin it, and just to satisfy my curiosity of if I just do it that very straightforward, like the logical, sensical way, if that'll work out. So I'm going to pin 1.5 inches in on each edge. And then measure it around the hole, the armhole or arm side, just to see how that works out before I move any further. I mean, this is, yeah, definitely the no-brainer way. So I'm going to So if I cut it there, then I would need to allow for 3/8 inch seam. And before I can even stitch this on, I'm going to have to press out my side seams anyway. So this is kind of more just like a curiosity thing for myself. And I'm not sure that the arm size even need to be like cinched in as much as like a neckline would be to get them to lay flat, just because I'm kind of new to sewing knits. And I am kind of learning like right along with you guys. I've never made this pattern before, and so I've just pinned the ends, allowing for that cut off, what I'll cut off of it, that 1.5 inch on each end, to the underarm. And I'm going to, actually that will not do. So my band, arm side band now is much shorter than the arm side opening, just to give you a good indication. That's roughly, this is the band, this is the garment, and it's pretty significantly shorter by, I'd guess, a couple of inches there. So I'm not sure if that way will actually work, and I don't want to cut anything off until I'm sure. I feel like I'm having to stretch this band too much to get it to meet the arm size. So I'm going to go back to my original plan and just start pinning it on and stretching as I go, just using my intuition. Now I'm not pinning it on to start sewing yet, because before I stitch the arm side binding to the garment, I'm going to have to stitch it to itself to make a closed loop, so to speak. But for now, I just want to kind of gauge. Now you would think that I could just cut off the same amount that I cut off of the garment, but it wasn't feeling right. It was feeling like it was going to be way too short if I did that. Now I do apologize that I can't be a little more precise on that. An expert seamstress or sewist I am not. I would call myself intermediate. And with knits, maybe advanced beginner. So I am definitely learning right along with you guys. Because I have done a handful of knit garments that had a neck binding and an armhole binding, I kind of have developed a feel for how stretched it should be, the binding that is, to the garment. So that's kind of what I'm basing this on. So I've met back up now at the underarm seam. And I do have just a little bit left of this fabric. Like I mentioned, it was a remnant piece. So I don't have a lot. I can't screw up too many times. But if I have to cut, if I go ahead and try this and it's not quite right and I have to cut one more out, I think I'll be okay on that. So I've got it to where it meets up with the other end. And really there's only maybe an inch overlap there. So that's quite a bit less than I took off of the garment. So I'm going to go with this and just going to cut this little bit off here. And if it's not quite right, what I may do is just baste it on. If it's not quite right, I can always shorten it a little bit more. So it's better that I kind of don't take off too much. It's rather to take off not enough, because I can always, fix that. I know I'm rambling. I apologize, you guys. Just figuring it out as I go. Okay, so I'm going to stitch the ends of the band together and then pin it onto the armhole and baste it on, and we'll go from there. Okay, so if this does work out, I know how much to cut off the other one. I'll just use my little piece here. I know this is seeming all very imprecise, but we'll make it work. Okay, got that basted on, and I'm kind of thinking that the only way to really know for sure if this is going to lay properly is to go ahead and turn it under and try it on. I'm afraid to keep going with any more stitching until I have tried it on. So maybe what I'll do is turn it under and then just do a couple of pins right here. But then the pins might skew how it lays. So complicated. But I'm going to try that. It'll give me an idea at least. I think I'll have a pretty good idea if it's going to lay flat or, gape out. We'll try it and see. All right, I've got that all pinned under. I'm going to go try it on. I'll be back. Okay, I am back. I tried it on with the armhole binding pinned. I'm happy with it. I'm going to go forward with putting the permanent stitching in. All right, so I got that armhole, arm side binding in nicely. Just need to give it a good press and do the other one and do the hem. There's a little bit of cleanup to do on the inside as far as finishing off those raw edges. That shouldn't take much time. And I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys with a cliffhanger. We'll call this part 1. And I hope you'll tune back in next time when I will have the finished dress to show you and model for you. I'm also going to do a little bit of pattern review, all in that same video, where I'll talk about how the process went, anything that I found particularly easy, difficult, anything to look out for. Would I make it again? Would I choose this type of fabric again or go with something different? So I hope that you will come back for that. And I hope that you enjoyed the video. I thank you guys for hanging out with me in my sewing room while I worked on this project today. And I look forward to chatting with you in the next one. And I will talk to you then. Bye.